years to get people to actually believe in it and start using amino acids. And it was beyond that because I had to convince people to not formulate on crude protein and to start formulating on a digestible amino acid basis and to use amino acid ratios. So it was more than just threonine. It was the whole amino acid nutrition side and a whole different philosophy.
Welcome to the Poultry Podcast Show. I'm your host, Dr. 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗃𝗃, and today I'm here with Dr. David Burnham. Welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to meet you, Liz. Yeah, nice to be on the podcast.
I'm really excited to chat with you today. But first, I would love to hear, how did you get into poultry?
Well, it's quite an interesting story. I grew up in South Africa, and I always wanted to work in the cattle industry. And when I finished high school, I went to live in Namibia, which is the country on the west coast of Africa. And I used to go and work on cattle ranches up there. And so that was always my passion, to work with cattle. I went up there to get money to go to college, which I did. But then money got tight and I needed some money. And so I got a grant from, believe it or not, the Egg Control Board. And it was devastating to me because it meant I had to go and work in chicken. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I got really lucky. And I started off, when I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I went and worked for the government in the poultry science department there. And I did some research and learned a lot about chickens and government and why I don't like working for the government. But they sent me back to school to do my graduate work. And I went and worked with 𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, and he taught me about everything I know about chickens today. So I got lucky. I got really lucky.
That certainly is an interesting path. So from the time that you graduated, how did you make it to the current position that you hold today? What was that path like?
Well, it's a very long, windy path, and it's been quite interesting. I could talk for a long time about it, but I started off in my first real job. I was working with a startup feed company. It was a multi-species mill, so I fed chickens and pigs and cows and dairy cows and beef cows and whatever. And it was a lot of fun because I had to create formulations for each of those species from nothing. And I was a tech support guy, and you can imagine I was very young. I was probably mid-20s at that time. And so it was a lot of responsibility on me, to get out there. And so that's where I started off. Then I decided I needed to learn something about business. So I went back and I did a business degree. And then while I was away, they got bought out by the big guys because we took too much business. So the big guys bought them out and shut them down. So then I went and worked with a company, 𝗟𝗏𝗃𝗃𝗃 Chicken Farms. This is still in South Africa. And they're the biggest chicken producer in South Africa. At that point, we were doing about 5 million a week, which is, compared to the U.S. numbers, small, but it was big there. And I had five plants, 5 mills. I did all the tech, the research. I did all the tech support for those mills. So I traveled a lot. I worked very, very hard. But it was a lot of fun and I learned a lot. And then I moved to the United States in 1989. And that's a long story. You won't go into all the details. It was a very difficult path for me because I came here and no one knew who I was. They didn't know anything about my background, my education. So put it plainly, I started off in market research for a while and then did that for a year down in Florida. And then I moved to California and I worked with 𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃 on the feed formulation side for a few years. And then I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, where I worked with a little startup company on direct microbials. And that was very interesting because that set me up a lot of what I learned there emphasized the importance of gut health and how important it is to get early gut health and to maintain that gut health. And so, from there, I got really, really lucky, and I met a fellow, 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝘀𝘁𝘀, who's the swine nutritionist at 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝘀𝘁𝘀. And he asked me to go work with them on the poultry side. And so I was very fortunate because I had an opportunity to go and work with him, number one, but we commercialized 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗃𝗃. And 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗃𝗃 is, back then, no one knew about it, and it required an awful lot of work from my side because I had to go and tell all the professors at all the universities that they didn't know anything about amino acid nutrition. And so it took a while. It took a long time. And what's interesting, at the time, they were willing to give us, they started with only 4,000 tons a year. I mean, today, with 3 million businesses, a $12 billion business. So I like to feel like I had an influence in that, So that really was a good time. I learned a lot there as well, traveled a lot there, and it was a lot of fun. Then I went and worked with 𝗽𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗃𝗃 for a period of time, for 5 years. I did 2 years of tech support, and that was for the Americas. And I did some work in South Africa, some in Asia, some in Europe. And then they asked me to do marketing. So I did 2 years as a global marketing person. And then they asked me to go back and help fix the pedigrees and GGPs around the world. And I did that for a year, but that was really tough. About killed me. That was a lot of travel. So I left there and I went to 𝗽𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, and 𝗽𝗃𝗃, which is now 𝗺𝗷𝘁𝗃𝗃, nutrition. And I worked there for almost 2 years. They didn't have any broiler business at that time, so I started off, and we got a fair amount of good broiler business. Then 𝗺𝗷𝘁𝗃 bought 𝗽𝗃𝗃, and I was concerned about working with a big company, so I left. And I went to work with DSM for a while, and but the folks that I'd been doing the nutrition for when I was at 𝗽𝗃𝗃 contacted me and asked me if I would continue doing the nutrition. And while I was with 𝗽𝗃𝗃, I met the Johnsons at House of Raeford. And so he was the first person who came back to me and asked me if I would do his nutrition for him. And I did that. But I was working 7 days a week, 5 days for DSM, and 1 day for Mr. Johnson, and 1 day for another company, and I did some others as well. That went on for about 9 months, and then I went to Mr. Johnson. I said, "Man, this is killing me. I'd rather just do your work than others." So I said, so he put me on payroll, and I did his work plus other people's work. So it was the luckiest time of my life. So I've worked with them since then, and it's been great. They are wonderful people. They put up with my nonsense most of the time, and it's been amazing. We started off when things were tough, but we turned things around, and that's really rewarding. Being able to look back and see how things improve, what the things that you've done, the basic stuff. And I was talking about the guts, how important guts are. And I joke, when I feed a chicken, I feed the guts. That's number one. Number two, I feed the people that feed the chicken. They're very important. If I don't get support from them, nothing works. And thirdly, I actually feed the chicken. But number 1 and 2 are probably the most important.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a bit of who I am. I know it's probably long, but that's who I am.
No, that was so exciting to hear from somebody who was at the beginning of some of these single amino acid additives. That is so cool. And the fact that today they're commonplace, to just think that at one point it was an uphill battle to get them to be used in the diets is so neat.
Yeah. Today people just take it for granted. It really wasn't that long ago. I started that in 1996. We started that project, and it took me about 8 years to to get people to actually believe in it and start using amino acids. And it was beyond that because I had to convince people to not formulate on crude protein and to start formulating on a digestible amino acid basis and to use amino acid ratios. So it was more than just threonine. It was the whole amino acid nutrition side and a whole different philosophy, So it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
One of 𝗍𝗍𝗪𝗀's core strategies is to give customers the flexibility to do more with less, which is a common theme among many companies and producers in today's industry. As a science-driven company, 𝗍𝗍𝗪 has proven results to help our customers achieve optimal performance using customized programs with our core phytase and xylanase.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, the campaign worked and has paid dividends, especially in the sustainability side. So I'm glad your perseverance paid off.
Well, I'm glad they invested in the technology and supported me. Yeah, that's amazing.
So I want to talk a little bit about your experience with pullet and breeder feeding. I'm not sure if one of those is a better place to start, but so what are some of the things maybe that you've seen change in how we feed pullets and breeders?
So as I said, I started feeding, the first pullets and breeders I started feeding was in 1982, 83. And they've changed a lot since then. The performance has changed. Back then it was quite easy. The birds were small in body weight. In general, broiler birds were small in body weight. They didn't grow like they do today. They didn't have the appetite that they have today. But even then, back then, I saw issues with breeders. People have always had problems with breeders, and it's difficult. It's the funnest part of what I do, honestly, is feeding pullets and breeders, because they are challenging. And so, I've noticed over the years, as the birds have changed, I look at daily gains have improved dramatically. Feed conversion has changed dramatically. So ultimately the pullet, they broilers, and we have to make laying hens out of them. And that's where it becomes really challenging. So what I've noticed, and it's interesting, a lot of people struggle with pullets and breeders, and I think it's not as hard as we make it out to be. I think we complicate it a lot, and I think it's the basics that we don't get right. A lot of people don't get right. They keep chasing things. With anything in nutrition, consistency is key, right? To me, I tell people I seldom change formulations, very seldom. But I work really, really hard at not changing formulations. I work very closely with our buyer. Our buyer only buys from certain people. We do not reformulate if there's a small savings in feed cost. I'm very fortunate in that manner, in that aspect, because the Johnsons have trusted me to do that. So we don't chase pennies, right? We look at the long term, and particularly pullets and breeders. It's very important that they don't see change. And it's really important for the guys that are managing those birds that they don't see change. Because of the fact that we restrict the amount of feed that these birds get, you have the service guys have to learn how to use that feed, right? Mm-hmm. So once they know your feed, the worst thing you can do is change it, because then they have to relearn it. And it takes so long. You're looking at 6 months on the pullet side to understand, and it may be 2 or 3 or 4 cycles before you can see the effect of those changes. So to me, the best thing to do is keep it simple, absolutely simple. Find something that works. Don't change. The birds don't like change. No one, I don't like change, but I do change. But I mean, we've got to keep it simple, right? And I think too often we're chasing a penny here, we're chasing a penny there. We can get this ingredient this week, we can't get it next week. I don't change ingredients. I don't change suppliers. We've been using the same supplier of meat and bone meal for 12 years. We get the same product every single week. Our composition of that is consistent year in and year out. That helps tremendously because then I know what those birds are getting. We can see a response. Mm-hmm. Then it gets back to the next biggest challenge that I see is understanding what these people have got in their feed. You have to understand the composition of your feed really, really well. Without understanding that, you cannot do the rest. Once you know what's in your feed, you then need to understand daily intake of nutrients. So you take that feed that you're feeding. You take the feed amounts that you want to feed. You calculate the daily intake of each nutrient, and I'm talking calories and, well, protein if you want to, but the amino acids all the way through, calcium, phosphorus, sodium, all of those things. You follow them all the way through, and you look at, are there periods during that phase where you get big fluctuations from 1 week to the next? And if you've seen things like that, you know that that is wrong. You have to maintain a consistent increase of daily nutrient intakes right through peak of those birds, beyond peak. If you don't have a straight line, well, it's got to be a curvilinear line, but if it's not smooth, there's something wrong. And you need to understand where it's wrong. And that's where you need to start. Don't chase things until you understand what the birds are seeing every single day. The other problem I see too often is people weigh birds and they will react to the weight of that bird. Mm. The problem is when you weigh birds, you weigh 50 birds, maybe, some not. The problem when you weigh birds is you catch the big ones. The small ones, they're gone. By the time we put that catch pin out, the little guys are gone. They're not going to get caught. So you bias your weights. So you have to be really, really careful when you start changing your feed amounts based purely on body weights. Often we've got the big birds, we're underfeeding the little birds anyway, and we compound that issue, right? So be careful. But you almost better not to weigh the birds because the weighing the birds can bring in an error. So once you define that curve and once you know exactly how much per bird per day or every other day, whatever, then that's how you should feed. I see too often people will change a feed. They'll have a lot of different feeds and they'll go from a starter to a grower to a developer to a pre-breeder to a breeder 1 to a breeder 2, whatever. They complicate it. You only need 3 feed. You need a starter feed, a grower feed. Maybe you can put a pre-breeder in, but you don't really need it. And you need 1 breeder feed. Because every time you make a change, if you look at what happens to daily intake of nutrients, it'll change. And the birds don't like to see that change. So if a more aggressive bird is seeing that they're getting, say, 50 grams of something a day, and tomorrow it gets 40 grams of that something tomorrow, it will eat the 50 grams. So the small guy, he's going to get, instead of getting 40, he's going to get 30. And this is when we end up with all these issues with uniformity. And we end up with issues with flighty birds, and we end up with birds that pile and those things. So it's all about keeping constant, smooth increase in daily nutrients. And if you do that, you can mitigate a lot of those issues. The other issue that I see the most, and I've seen a lot, is we don't pay attention to our feed delivery system.
Yeah.
Again, if you're looking at daily intake of nutrients, and you look at if one bird gets 20% more than the other bird and feed them out. Those differences in daily intake of nutrients are huge. And they will cause flightiness. They will cause panic. They will cause all these issues. So I go into too many chicken houses and they don't have enough feeder space. And I'm looking and they buy feeder space based on the specifications from the supplier. And they say you can put 16 pullets around it. No. You can put 11 pullets around it, which means that you've got 5 pullets that don't have a place to eat when the feeders come on. The other thing is managing that feed in those feeders, the feed in the hoppers, the feed in the augers, keeping the lines charged, making sure that that feed is evenly distributed out of the whole house, bringing more feed lines as the birds get older. These are the issues that I think are far bigger and far more important than chasing a few pennies here and on formulation costs. Those are the issues that really, really make a difference to me. And we get those squared away and everything else will get better. And I see too many people that say, well, I got bad feathering. They're pulling feathers. Well, it's not your formulation. It's the feed delivery system that's the problem. Because when the little bird is sitting at the back there and there's no place for them to get to a feeder to get nice feed, the only protein that it can see are those feathers on the thighs. They will pull those feathers. And if you walk in a pullet house and they're pulling feathers, you know that you've got a problem with feed deliveries. And everyone will go and they'll change their formulation. They'll increase protein. And they'll think that'll fix it. But it makes it worse. Because these birds are so able to deposit muscle. And my goal is to keep the amino acid lysine as low as I possibly can, right? Because lysine stimulates or determines the muscle protein, the breast meat muscle deposition. So that's where it gets really, really challenging to me is you have to make sure that you don't increase the amount of protein and particularly lysine because then you get these overfleshed birds. And if you get an overfleshed bird, you end up with terrible issues down the line. There's no way to manage an overfleshed bird in the breeder house. 12 years that I've been working with Johnson. If I look at the broiler side, the breast meat has increased from 26% up to 30%, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we have selected birds that have tremendous breast meat yield. And this is what we don't want in breeders. The other thing is that the body fat has gone down, right? The body fat's gone from, say, 1.5% down to 0.5%. We've lost a percentage point in body fat. We've increased our breast muscle tremendously. So we're in a situation where these birds are genetically looking for calories. If you look at, the other thing is, in 2011, when I started with the Johnsons, we were growing an 8.25 pound bird at a feed conversion of a 205. Today, we can grow an 8.25 pound bird at a feed conversion of 1.70. That is from 16.9 pounds of feed to 14 pounds of feed. That's a 17% less feed for the same body. So if you look at your efficiency of nutrient utilization has improved by about 17%. It is enormous. And now we go and we take that to a pullet and a breeder. And we are not changing our formulations to accommodate that, right? We are still feeding 16% protein. And so we haven't adjusted our feed formulations to accommodate that. And these birds today are energy deficient. They are not protein deficient. We have this benchmarking system. And I've got to be careful what I say here, but we've got this benchmarking system. And every time they come to do a review for us, they'll put the graphs up on the wall, on the board, and they'll say, your calories are higher than everyone, and your protein is lower than everyone. and your lysine is lower than everyone. And I say, so what? I said, so what? How's our performance? No, your performance is good. How are your costs? Your costs are great. I said, so why are you putting that up on the board? What is the relevance of that? Now, I'm in a fortunate position where I can push back. But there are many people that do what I do are not as grumpy as me and don't have that opportunity to actually push back. And if they do not conform to what's up there, that they are being penalized. And the other thing is that the service guys see that they're different, and they'll attribute their performance issues to the fact that they are different than the average. I will tell you the average is wrong, absolutely wrong. And I don't know how to fix that for the industry, because we do not do any breeder research. No one does any useful breeder research, not even the primary breeders, not the university. It's too expensive. It takes too long. So this is the challenge that we sit with. Is we've got this deal where these birds are more efficient. We're overfeeding, I believe we're overfeeding protein, we're underfeeding calories. And we end up with a situation where we get overfleshing in these birds, and they come into production. And there's been some talk around the industry, and I listen, I don't talk so much, but I listen a lot. And when I started with it 12 years ago, we were peaking hens on our feeds at 34.5 pounds, which is about 157 grams per bird per day. I'm hearing people peaking their birds at 36 pounds, which is 163 grams. And yet our efficiency of nutrient utilization is improved by 17%. So why are we feeding more? We should be feeding a whole lot less if our birds are more efficient. And then when we look at our production and our fertility issues, I don't know if you ever look at those numbers, but the last few years have been pitiful. Every year our egg production goes down and our fertility goes down. Right now in the United States, we cannot produce enough chicks to meet the demand for chick placement. So when I look at all these things, the question, and I haven't got the answers, but to me, the questions I'm asking is, are we doing the right thing? Mm-hmm. Do we need to start looking at some of these other things? Do we need to start looking at maybe higher calorie feeds, lower protein feeds? I don't know. But to me, we're doing it wrong. And we are being forced to do it wrong. Because if you look at what the primary breeders are recommending we feed, they don't have the right numbers. Both of them don't have the right numbers. We've got the benchmarking system that's telling everyone to feed higher protein, which exacerbates problems. So I don't think we're doing it right. That is my concern where we are in this world today. So, and a heavy bird coming into production is very difficult to feed because if it's heavy, you have to maintain that heaviness throughout the laying cycle. If you don't feed it, you won't get the eggs. And if you're feeding too much protein, because they're energy deficient, right? So if you're feeding higher protein to maintain their body weight, but they're energy deficient, you're not going to get the eggs. So they're going to keep feeding more protein into these birds. And that's why we get back to what I was saying at the beginning is, what are the daily nutrient intakes? Those are the only numbers that matter. The rest of it really doesn't matter. Yeah. So that's what I want to say about that today. And I've got one other little message, that something that always concerns me in breeders is they get hot. They get heat stress very quickly. And particularly this time of year where we can have, today it's 50 here, tomorrow it's going to be 70 something, then 2 days it's going to be 80 something. We go through these temperature swings, and these birds haven't adjusted to summer temperatures yet. they are, and the growers and the managers of the farms haven't adjusted to the weather changes. And that's why I tell our guys every January, I send out an email and I say, if the temperature is going to change, be aware of it. Look at your forecast. Look at the next week's forecast. If you see it's going to be warm, you have to cool your birds down more. And I've seen this too often where these birds will get hot. They'll start panting. And we will get respiratory alkalosis, which results in 𝗪𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀. And we'll get birds that die. If you go in the chicken house, you will see them on the floor if you get there early enough. But if you work with breeders, you've got to be there early enough. Otherwise, don't do it. So, but if you go in there and you will see them, they'll go in tremors, they'll be cyanotic, and they will die. The ones that don't die, I see about 7 to 10 days later, we see an increase in peritonitis. And I think that increase in peritonitis relates back to that heat stress. Because the 𝗪𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃, what it does is it affects the muscle tone. And I think the infundibulum, I've got no proof. I'm not a scientist. I'm a chicken feeder. But the infundibulum, I believe, is not remaining open. And the yolk is actually going to the abdomen rather than into the oviduct. Because you open them up 7 to 10 days, you see the yolk in the abdomen. So I just want to say to people, please, 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 this time of year, 3 days, if you get 3 days of hot weather, and it doesn't have to be hot, it has to be hot or different. Please make sure you cool those birds. To me, it's the most important thing. And, people talk about 𝗪𝗀 and sodium bicarbonate. I don't use any 𝗪𝗀 or sodium bicarbonate, but I keep my chloride levels up. And that, to me, chloride is an electrolyte balance side. The high chloride allows me to keep that balance. And I think it certainly helps. So that's my plea to the people at the moment. Please watch your temperatures and make sure, ventilate them, cool them down 3 hours before they start feeding them. Because if they gain 1 core degree C in core body temperature, it takes them 24 hours to lose that. So if they cannot lose it during the next 24 hours, they will gain another degree the next day. And it's on that 3rd day, generally, that we will see it, because then they've increased their core temperature. And if we look at what happens when we feed those birds, they have so much feed in their crop. The heat increment coming off that feed is just enormous. And they get stressed. And if you look in a chicken house and you measure the temperatures between the birds in the scratch area, you'll find there's quite a big difference in temperature. Because the air coming in is going down the scratch area. It's turbulent air over the birds. It's not cooling them while they're up there on the slat. Yeah. So please do yourselves a favor and watch your inlays.
So I know that most of the focus, at least when we're talking about producing eggs for the future, it's always on the hens and the pullets. Is there even less data about the roosters that go alongside them? I mean, their ratio is quite different, but what do you think about the roosters?
Yeah, people don't realize how important the male is. But the male is really, really important. And I'm hearing numbers of people placing large numbers of males at the moment. Really, large numbers. And that's because these males are falling apart and they spike in 5 and more times. The male feeders and the male management is generally a big issue. The floors underneath the male feeders all dug out. Oh. So because these birds all bathe and they dig and they scratch or whatever. So your floor's not level. So instead you can reduce your feeder space easily by 50%. And so those birds that cannot get to a feeder, they cannot eat, they're going to lose condition. The other thing that I notice is sometimes the feeders are too low, and they do that to try and overcome the uneven floors. And I'll see hens sitting on the slats, waiting for the male feeders to come down because it's easier to eat out of the male feeders is on the slats. So they'll stand on the slats, and as soon as those male feeders come down, they'll run down and they'll start eating out of those feeders. The other thing I see is that the feeders are not fastened down. So they will swing. And when that happens, it'll swing up, and then you can lose easily 50% of your feeder space. It gets back to my initial story. The daily intake of nutrients for every single bird needs to be exactly the same. If you cannot maintain that, figure out what you need to do to maintain that. Because a young male, when he's mating and he's active, there's a lot of pressure from his male buddies. So he's fighting with them and he's mating. And these guys are absolutely energy deficient, absolutely energy deficient. And if we lose those testes, if those testes start resorbing, if you've got a 50-gram testes and you lose to 20 grams, that male is done. You cannot do anything with that male. Mm-hmm. So the worst thing is I walk in a chicken house and I see pretty males. And those are the ones strutting around that think they're something special. Get rid of them. They're doing nothing. They're just eating feed. The little scrunty guy, get rid of him. His testes are resorbed. If that happens, figure out why. And oftentimes, look at the feeder. Look at the feeder, the feed design. Look at the floors. Look at the feeder height. Those are the things we need to be looking at absolutely right now. And until we start paying attention to those, we cannot fix this. Now, we've tried male feeds, specific male feeds, and I think they help. The issue is that the mills don't like them, the trucking companies don't like them, the service guys don't like them, but that's something we absolutely, I think, we need to all do going forward, is actually have a male feed to try and help these males. Because you've got to get calories into those birds. And if you pick them up, there's no fat on these birds. If you look at a pullet at 22 weeks of age, there's very little fat on those birds anymore. And so they don't have those reserves to be able to come into production either. So it's all about making sure every bird gets the same amount. And if I can just back it just a little bit, coming into production is a really critical time. And people always worry about body weight uniformity. I look at sexual uniformity, sexual maturity uniformity of sexual maturity. And I can see that by the cones. You go and you look at the cones. If they're all white, pale, that's fine. If they're all red, that's fine. But if you get a bunch that are pale and a bunch that are red, you've got a problem. Because hormonally, until that bird transitions from a broiler to a laying hen, she's a broiler. Mm-hmm. And hers, she will take all those nutrients and she will use them to deposit body weight. That's what her body is designed for. Is to and they will develop huge amounts of breast milk. Because when we start feeding these birds into production, we feed them a lot of feed. They're restricted very severely until that point, but then we start feeding them a lot. And so you can imagine how much muscle they will deposit in a very, very short period of time if they are not sexually ready for the development of the oviduct. Once they're sexually or hormonally ready, those nutrients will go to the oviduct and will not deposit breast meat. And that's why if they are delayed coming into production, those birds get really, really overfleshed. And those are the challenge birds that we have going forward. They'll come into production late. They'll go out of production early because they're overfleshed. So it's all about uniformity, sexual uniformity, body weight uniformity, uniformity of daily intake of nutrients.
Well, this has been just really great. I love hearing your expertise, and I would disagree. You are a scientist. You're not just a chicken feeder. You've been doing some incredible things. So to wrap up today, I want to ask you the 3 questions that we ask all of our guests.
It's time for our famous 3. When it comes to raising healthy animals, you need more than the right solutions. You need the right partner who brings decades of industry expertise and a global team to put that knowledge to work for the advancement of your operation. At Phibro Animal Health Corporation, we are proud to work with you as your trusted partner.
The first one is do you have a favorite poultry-related resource that you use regularly?
Yeah, well, if I can, there are two books that I use a lot, and one is, and I hate to say this, and it's an embarrassment to me, quite honestly, but the Brazilian tables for poultry and swine feeding. They were put out by Dr. Restagno.
Sure.
And I've met Dr. Restagno on many occasions, and he's an amazing individual.
Yeah.
That book is a book that everyone should have a copy on their desk, and they should read it, and they should understand. The other one is Poultry Nutrition by Rick Klein and Peter Crystal. I know both of them. They were both grad students with 𝗺𝗷𝗁𝗀𝗁 when I was there. And they're both smarter than me. One lives in South Africa, one lives in Australia and New Zealand. But those two books are very good books that I think people should have. The Poultry Nutrition book is a very practical book. It covers everything you really need to know in nutrition. And I think every student should have that. And I think every veterinarian should have it. So those are the ones that I think are really important.
Yeah, those are great. Do you have a favorite book, resource, or anything else that's non-poultry related that you reference regularly?
Yeah, YouTube. I live on YouTube.
Love that. That's a great resource.
Yeah, to me that I can learn a lot. Like most things today, you have to be very skeptical, but you have to be skeptical of everything. I think that's probably done me. I've always been skeptical of people. I've never believed anything I haven't done myself. So when someone tells me something, I don't believe them. I start off not believing them, and then eventually I'll believe them. Once I've worked it through my mind. So as long as you're willing to look at some of the stuff on there and think about it, but it makes me think, and to me, that's the most important thing to me is to think about new and different things and different ways of thinking about things.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal, and a perfect reason why critical thinking is so important to teach students.
Yeah, don't believe anyone. Yeah.
So my last question for you today is, what is your advice for somebody to be successful in the poultry industry?
It is the most amazing industry. I've been trying to retire for about 5 years now, right? so I've been promising people I'd retire for a long time. But to me, it's a very interesting field of work. To me, it's not work. To me, it's exciting. It's hard. I mean, we work hard. It's difficult. The responsibility is enormous. I make a wrong decision. It's multi-million dollars of potential wrongness. So people who want to get into this must be willing to work really hard. They must be willing to learn continually. Just because you've graduated doesn't mean you know anything. Yes, you know a lot at this point, but you don't know, and it's going to change. It changes from month to month, year to year, week to week, day to day. So you've got to want to understand how things work. You've got to want to understand biology and physiology and chemistry and biology and biochemistry. Those things are important in what we do. I cannot do my job if I don't understand them. I used to understand them a whole lot better than I do today, but now I've got a young fellow who understands a whole lot more than I do, so he does all that. Mm-hmm. But so learn those things and learn how to be observant. I walk into a chicken house. Well, I don't walk in the chicken house. I open the door in the chicken house and I look in the chicken house. And then I quietly will open the door and I'll walk in and sit down on the floor. And I'll look at chicken. I don't walk in the chicken house. Because as soon as you start walking, you start upsetting the dynamic that's going on in the chicken. So you have to be an observer. You have to be patient. And you have to be able to sit and observe and notice. That's really important. And then you have to be able to take criticism.
Yeah.
And when people criticize, you cannot get upset. You can get upset, but you're not allowed to show it, right? And you need to be able to listen to that criticism, and then you need to be able to address it. Now, I know everything I do is wrong. Every number and every formulation I do is wrong. Everything I do is wrong. But the day I sit, and every time we make a change, I evaluate and evaluate and evaluate and evaluate and evaluate, and I'll make a change. So the day I make the change, if someone challenges me on something, I can go, and I'm confident in my mind that the decisions that I have made are the best decisions available or were at the time when I made those decisions. So I can defend my position. If you cannot do that, if you cannot look someone in the eye and have a discussion and explain very carefully and in a manner that they understand, if you cannot do that, don't do this job. You have to be able to interact with people. And one of the hardest things that I've found when I've hired people to work with me is I can find a good technician. They're good scientists. Like I said, I'm not a scientist. They're really good scientists. But there are very few people who have a personality where they are able to interact with us. From the guy who catches the birds, to the guy who runs it through the plant, to the CEO, to the veterinarian, everyone, you have to be able to interact with those people. And you have to get, my number 2 issue here is to feed the people, to feed the chicken. That's really, really important. So if you don't have a personality to do that, I would suggest you stay in research or you stay in something like it. This is a tough job. It's a really, really tough job. And when they start throwing millions of dollars at you and you've cost the company this number of millions of dollars and this, what are you going to do to fix these millions of dollars you've lost? And you look at them and you say nothing. That's the hardest thing in the world is to say, I'm going to do nothing because everything we're doing is correct. And this is why it's correct. So this is, you need a special type of person to do it. And if you're a special type of person, it's an amazing career. I've been doing it a long time. I'm still doing it. And I'm not doing it for the money. I do it because it's fun. So that's it.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. This was wonderful, and I know that those listening also learned just several nuggets of great information. So thank you for sharing your expertise and your career with us today. This was awesome.